morning. It's the second week of Advent, as Debbie just shared with us. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing that scripture with us. And we continue our series today, Travel Light. Last week we talked about letting go of distractions. How did that go? Did you find some, actually we're talking about today, letting go of stuff is what we talked about last week. How did we do with letting go of stuff? Did you let go of some stuff? I let go of some stuff this week. There was some stuff that went out to my garbage. I got rid of a few things. How did it go with thinking about how you can give more? Have you thought of some ways maybe you can give? I did that this week as well. There was somebody that I ran into that needed some help, so gave them some money to help them out. We've all got some things that we need to be thinking about this Christmas. Another question I asked is, did you think of buying less? Have you thought about buying less this year so that you can give more? Today we really do need to think of strategizing, and today we're going to continue to strategize. We talked about letting go of stuff last week. Today we're going to talk about letting go of distractions. We don't have any of those this time of year, do we? We don't have any distractions this time of year. It's well, that's not the truth. The truth is that perhaps this is the most distracting time of year. I mean, there's so much going on. We have so many things going on in our families, in our workplaces, in our community, and yes, even here within our church. And it can get really, really hard to focus on what this season is about. And we're talking in this series about traveling light and letting go of some things. And so distractions are some of those things that can weigh us down and burden us during this time of year, where we don't really think about the reason for the season, and that is Jesus. You know what? I got a picture with me today. That's my little dog Winston. Isn't he cute? Believe me, he doesn't usually look like that, okay? He's usually spreading chaos in my house, okay? But the other day I was watching, and he just looked so cute. But sometimes when I take him out, I've shared with you, if you've ever had a dog before, dogs are easily distracted. You ever notice that? Like I take him outside, actually a couple of days ago, so him and my other dog, Spot, I have two dogs, we went outside to take him to the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, let's go potty, and all of a sudden I see him dart to the other side of my yard, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what's going on? So I go around the corner of my house, and they got distracted because there was a possum in my backyard. I don't know where this possum came from, never seen it around the area, anything like that. And they're over there sniffing it, and then the possum does what possums do, right? He plays dead. So he's laying there like he's dead, and my dogs are, and I'm trying to get him away. Needless to say, they never did do what they were supposed to do when they went outside. I had to get them back inside, and then I watched for the possum to leave. But our dogs are easily distracted. I wish it was just dogs, but the fact is that all of us find it hard to stay focused. Here's another little picture. It was his birthday this week, so he had his 1-year birthday, and it's just really, really easy to get distracted. It's really hard to stay focused. It's even hard for me to stay focused when I preach sometimes. I see people move around, or I see, I see some of you every now and then kind of drift off a little bit of sleep. I see it, okay? It gets a little bit distracting sometimes, even when I'm up here preaching. Does any one of you, with that cute little picture of Winston, maybe that picture is distracting you from what I'm saying? Do you remember anything I just said, okay? Okay? I think you get my point. There's all these distractions. Right now, I'm standing right here with my hand in my pocket. My phone's buzzing, okay? There's just all these things that are out there that want to distract us. Now, what does the word distraction mean? We kind of know what the concept is, but here's what it means. Distraction is a pulling apart or a separating or a drawing of the mind in different directions. So a distraction is something that pulls us away from where we want to be focused. It's a kind of a separating of the mind. I heard someone once say this, is that the devil doesn't need to destroy us, he only needs to distract us. Sometimes we think that Satan is going to try to attack me or destroy my life or whatever. He doesn't need to do that. His greatest tool is distraction, and really this time of year, in the middle of the celebration of the Christmas season, as we celebrate the arrival of our Savior, Jesus, Satan's focus isn't maybe to destroy the season. His focus is to distract us during the season. I mean, if he can just get our minds off of the things of God, he is winning the battle, isn't he? He's winning the battle if we can just get our minds off of who Jesus is, what he's about, the reason for this season. And I want to look at a passage in Luke chapter 10 today as we get started, because in Luke chapter 10, there's a passage there of someone who gets distracted. There are two sisters. And these two sisters, they are hosting a dinner for a group of people in for Jesus, and we read this in verse 38. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him, and she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted, there's the word, right? But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. So think about it. Martha is super excited for Jesus to come over. You know, if I were to bring this in the present day, think of it. I mean, she's getting the casserole dishes all ready, right? She's cleaning up the house. She wants everything to be just right. She's making sure that the toilet paper matches the shower curtains. You know, she's making sure everything's just right for when Jesus arrives. And then in the middle of all this, she turns around and she looks and she sees her sister Mary seemingly doing nothing. And she gets frustrated. And so she goes and, kind of like a little first grader, she goes and snitches on her to Jesus. She goes and tells on her. Because then it says that she came to Jesus, and she said, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? And then she kind of commands Jesus here, tell her to help me. You go tell her. I mean, we're the king of the universe. She's commanding Jesus. You go tell her to help me. This whole story reminds me sometimes of when I was a kid. Like me and my brothers, we'd be doing work, but I'd be the one mostly doing the work, or maybe sometimes they'd be doing the work, and I'd be kind of being lazy. And then what do? They go tell mom or dad, right? Hey, Danny's not helping. That's what she's doing here. And look how Jesus responds in verse 41. Because in verse 41, you could just hear the love in his voice, the compassion in his voice. He says, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. And I want to stop there for just a brief second. Is that happening right now in your life? This season that we're in kind of seems to compound, doesn't it? All of the stuff that we normally have. Unfortunately, during Christmas, a lot of the worries and concerns and anxiety that we have during the rest of the year, unfortunately, it's not like those worries, concerns, anxiety. It isn't like they say, oh, it's Christmas time, so I'm going to go away now. No, they're still there. And then what do? We put on top of it all of the stuff that comes with the season. There was something interesting the other day that I saw, a little news article that said that for some people, Christmas music actually raises their anxiety. And that surprised me. I'm like, really? I always thought that, it was happy and joyful and all that. But when I dug into it, they said pretty much the reason is because it reminds them of everything they have to do this time of year. It's a reminder this is a special time of year. Oh, I've got to do this. I've got to buy this. There's all of these distractions, all these things that's pulling. But look what Jesus says in verse 42. He says, but few things are needed, or indeed just one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. She was spending time with Jesus, and that time couldn't be taken away from her. This Christmas, we're focusing on a lot of things that we're going to forget about, that's going to be taken from us. Spending time with Jesus is not something that can be taken away. A lot of the distractions that we have in our lives in this time of year are not bad distractions. They're not bad things, but they pull us away from what matters most. As parents, if you have kids, you're distracted about getting kids places and getting them things and buying their gifts. If you're a student, you can get distracted by worrying about whatever you wear to school and what others think about you. And at Christmas, all of us get distracted with the activities and the gifts and everything else. A lot of us are like Martha. but more of us need to be like Mary. We need to stop and spend time with Jesus. So how do we do that? How do we choose what is best? How can we move away from the distractions? And the first thing I want to challenge you to do this Christmas season, and remember, this message series, yes, it's kind of focusing on this season, but these are lessons for life that God gives us. The first thing we need to do is we need to find a way to diminish the distractions. We need to identify the things that distract us, and we need to try to find ways to stay away from those distractions. You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, Paul is talking about relationships and marriage, but he kind of gives us a principle there that I think is really good when it comes to diminishing distractions. What he says there is he's saying, I'm saying this for your own good, not to restrict you, but that you may live in a right way in undivided devotion to our Lord. He's saying there, he's saying, I'm telling you these things, and that's what I'm trying to do today. I'm trying to encourage you today to try to find that undivided attention that's needed to the Lord. You know, that is how we diminish the distractions. He's saying that he's telling them, he's not trying to be legalistic, but he's encouraging them. He's saying, find the best way that you can to serve the Lord. You know, one of the biggest distractions that we have in our life, and I've talked about it before, it's the thing I was just talking about a minute ago. It's one of these things, isn't it? Cell phones are some of the biggest distractions. It's funny to me that I catch myself every now and then. Like maybe I'll forget my phone up in my bedroom and I'm in my living room or something. I'm like, oh, I got to go get my phone. You know, I might miss something. Yeah. I mean, it's a distraction. I'm not going to lie. My wife and I have talked about this. I have this problem from time to time. I'll get a text or something in the middle of dinner. And there's this distraction, and it's almost like I have to, I better look at it. It could be important. Well, 99.9% of the time it's not, right? So we have all of these distractions. And it's funny, it's like sometimes we can't even live without this thing, but we have to remember that humanity lived without cell phones for thousands and thousands of years, right? For thousands and thousands of years, we didn't really need to use these things. And yet somehow we've become so easily distracted. If we're separated from it, panic sets in. You know, statistics show that most people cannot go more than 10 minutes without checking their phone. So every 10 minutes, got to check and see what's on there. And it's affecting productivity. It's affecting productivity at work. It's affecting relationships. And yes, it's affecting our relationship with God. So focused on what's on here, and we forget that He's here. You know, social media is another one. Did you know that on average, you're finding, especially those who are young adults, spend more than 2 hours a day on social media? That's a lot. If you add that up, that equals about 7 years of a person's life looking at a screen. I want you to know today that your life is too valuable and your calling is too great to be distracted by social media, to be distracted by the smaller things in life. God has bigger things in store for you. We have to try to diminish the distractions. Maybe with your phone, maybe with that person that distracts, whatever it is, try to find ways to set up boundaries. That's kind of been, I was thinking the other day about what has been my word for the year in 2021. And whether it's been when I've counseled or talked to people or even in my own life, it's about setting up boundaries. Finding boundaries where you have to say, okay, this far and no further. We need to find those boundaries. You need to discover them. And sometimes we can do that ourselves. Sometimes we might need somebody else to come alongside us and help us find out what those boundaries are. But we need to find those boundaries in relationships. And really, that's what Paul was saying back there in 1 Corinthians. He's saying, if you're going to do the best thing for God, do it within the boundaries. You know, distractions, come in other forms besides cell phones and social media. And we've already talked about Christmas. But there are things that we have in our lives. There's television shows. There's our phones. And I'm not just talking the cell phone, just talking on the phone. There's even apps. There's all these things that are out there that can bring us distractions. And perhaps the biggest distraction in our life can be people. But the Bible teaches us that we need to find the right people to walk with, the wise people to walk with. And I want you to think today about the people in your life. They could be distracting you from your relationship with Jesus. They could be pulling you away. You need to think about who it is that you walk with. I've said this before. I've said it in sermon series. I say it every time in a class that I do with Rodney at the school. Show me your friends and I'll show you your future, right? Who we associate with and who we're with are either going to bring us closer to Christ or distract us from Christ. Now, that doesn't mean that we just totally, we totally lay aside everybody that doesn't bring us closer to Jesus, but we have to put boundaries on those relationships. So again, think of whether those that you are with are wise. So again, the first thing we have to do is we have to identify the distractions and find ways to diminish them. Put boundaries up. Another thing that we can do is to try to change our focus. To try to think of what is important in our lives. If you want to be successful, if you want to reach the goals and get to the places that God wants for you in your life, you have to focus on what is the most important. I like what Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 4. He says, "Let your eyes look straight ahead. Fix your gaze directly before you. Give careful thought to the paths for your feet and be steadfast in all your ways." I think many of us, and all of us at some point, have went through life without any goal or any aim or any purpose. And here Solomon's reminding us we have to have that focus and that purpose. And it's so easily distracted, and it can so easily be people, or like we talked about last week, the stuff in our life. Our focus has to be given to Jesus, like it says in Hebrews 3. Brothers and sisters who share in the heavenly calling. What does it say there? It says, fix your thoughts on who? On Jesus. Fix your thoughts on Jesus, whom we acknowledge as our apostle and high priest. You know, the apostle Peter, the disciple, well, at the time of the story that I'm sharing here, the disciple Peter learned the lesson of taking his eyes off of what is important in a really tangible way one time. If you think back into Matthew chapter 14, when Jesus was left behind on shore, he had gone to pray, and he told the disciples to go ahead on across the Sea of Galilee, and so they did. They got in their boat, and as they go across, they see Jesus coming to them walking on water. That's a shocker, right? And they see, at first it tells us that they thought he was a ghost. They didn't even think it was really him. And I can't blame them for that, because that's probably what I would think. I probably wouldn't even believe it with my own eyes, honestly. But Peter, you got to love Peter, right? Peter was very brash, and he was very bold with his faith, but sometimes he would kind of lose his steadiness. In Matthew chapter 14, verses 29 and following, it says that when he saw Jesus, Peter got down out of the boat and he walked on the water. He trusted Jesus. He's like, okay, Jesus, I want to walk on the water too. And so he stepped out and he walked on the water, and he did. But when he saw the wind that was around him, and he became afraid, and he began to sink. Why did he sink? Because he took his eyes off of Jesus. And immediately Jesus, thankfully, and he does the same for us, reached out his hand and caught him. And he says, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" He was distracted, wasn't he? He was distracted from Jesus and his ability to, in that moment, help him walk on water. His faith, he sunk because he focused on things that were not Jesus. You know what? Some of you in here right now are sinking. Maybe all of us are sinking in some way. And it comes in a lot of forms. You feel overwhelmed, maybe, with work or with family issues. Maybe your finances. Maybe there's a pain, there's a hurt in your life right now. I want to encourage you to put your eyes on Jesus. If we really do want to travel light this Christmas, that's the only way. having more events and more gifts, spending more time with family and friends, those things can be good, but even in those things we can find ourselves sinking. But when our eyes are on Jesus, we don't sink. Even though the wind's blowing around us, when we focus on Him, we can walk on water. There was a song I remember, it was one of my favorites when I was kind of in my formative years in high school, but it said, "If I keep my eyes on Jesus, I can walk on water." It was a song from Audio Adrenaline, and I still listen to it every now and then because it's so true. In my life, and I'm sure you've experienced in yours too, when I'm closer to Jesus, I can almost feel like I can conquer the world, right? Because Jesus has. Keep your eyes on Jesus. In Matthew 6, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, He goes, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you." Seek first Him, and everything else will be given. First. That is what Jesus is telling us. The first thing of the day needs to be Jesus. The first thing of the week, the first day of the week needs to be Jesus. That's one of the reasons we worship together on a Sunday, right? We start the week with Jesus. We give to Him the first with our resources, through our giving. The first of the year is coming up, isn't it? It's a good time to stop and think, okay, how am I going to give my year to Jesus? Again, when you put Him first, it helps you to focus on the important. Because the fact is that you're not going to wander into righteousness or stumble into effectiveness in your life. It doesn't happen by accident. We have to be focused, and to find that we have to keep our eyes on Jesus. Last week we realized that we often put stuff over people and stuff over Jesus. And again, we realize that experience and relationship needs to be over production and tasks. This Christmas, take time to slow down and focus on what's important. Focus on Jesus. Focus on people. Maybe even take time to focus on resting. I know that sounds crazy, right, at Christmas time. Rest? Christmas, huh? But focus on the important things. Rest can be one of the most productive things we can do. We talked about that a couple of sermon series ago. Focus on the important. Put your eyes on Jesus and rest in Him. And finally, here's one more thing you can do to travel light and to avoid the distractions. That is to keep your ears open to listening to the voice of God. In Isaiah chapter 30, there's this little verse there that I found this week that I'm sure I've read it at some point, but I'm like, whoa, this is cool. A cool way of describing God's voice. It says, "Whether you turn from the right or to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, 'This is the way. Walk in it.'" You hear a voice. God is always whispering to you. He's always speaking. We know from the Word that He spoke the world into existence, didn't He? That's what it tells us in Genesis, that He spoke the world into existence. God is a speaking God. If you think about it, throughout the world of all the many religions that are out there that are false religions, they don't have much in the way of a speaking God. God is always speaking. God speaks through His Word. He speaks through songs as we sing them together. He speaks through circumstances in our lives. Again, I want to tell you today that you are just too valuable, and your calling is too great to be distracted by voices that don't last. We're listening to too many voices that won't last. Lord, do we know? Boy, do we know. We have a lot of voices in our world trying to distract us. This verse here, as Isaiah shared with us, is we have to stop and listen. That voice behind us. This is the way. Walk in it. What it really comes down to today is this. The point is don't let the noise of this world distract you from the voice of God. Back in 1991, there was an interesting thing that happened when you talk about distractions. In 1991, the Chicago Symphony, they wanted to present a concert in its year-long celebration that the symphony was celebrating its 100th anniversary. And so, for the first time in the history of the United States, the present conductor of the symphony, as well as the two past conductors of the symphony, stood on the same stage together to lead this amazing orchestra. Well, at the celebration that was just before the concert, one of the gifts that was given to people who had given money to be able to go to the symphony, they had given them these clocks, these little souvenir clocks that kind of reminded them of that special event. And so everybody goes into the symphony hall, and of course they're carrying their special clock that they got as a gift. And they go and they sit down and they start hearing the music, and the drama fills in the room as the music fills the room. But then a few minutes later, at about 9:15 p.m., about 15 minutes after the program began, the music began to unravel because out in the auditorium there was this little beep. Beep, beep. And then there was another one. And then another beep. And then next thing you know, beeps are going off everywhere in the room. And so the symphony, they're trying to keep playing and they're trying to keep going, but they just can't do it because they're distracted by all these beeps in the room. And finally, after they had ended their first song, they stopped. The executive director of the symphony has to go out in front of the stage, or on the stage, and he tells everyone, he said that unfortunately they figured out that the manufacturer of the clocks had accidentally preset the alarms on these clocks for 9:15 p.m. So all these beeps are going off. And he said, and then it said there that now there was only one way to get on with the concert. He asked everyone who had one of the clocks to go and check them in back with the ushers to get them out of the room, to get the distraction out of the room. See, something that little, this little beep, distracted from this amazing music, and that's what can happen in our lives too. That's what can happen right now during Christmas as well. What are the beeps in your life right now that are distracting you from what God wants you to have this Christmas? You know, one final challenge I want to give you is to find that beep and to find that distraction and find a way to eliminate it. Maybe it's taking time off away from your phone, watching less TV, playing less video games. What is holding you back from being focused on God? And start with something small. Sometimes we usually go with something big. Start with something small that you can remove so that you can get your focus back on who He is. You know, at this Christmas, you can travel more lightly if you let go of some distractions. So again, like we said today, diminish the distractions. Focus on the important and listen to God's voice.